Okay, so we've got this flow chart. I made this flow chart for you, not really for today. Today it's pretty straightforward because you're going to start the problem. You're going to look for dominated strategies to reduce it. And is there a saddle point? Well, today there will be. And so today we're talking about strictly determined. Everything's pure strategies. We're going to find a saddle point, and we'll be able to see the value of the game and everybody's strategies and pretty much everything. So this is what we're doing today in 11.1. After that, after today's lesson, once we get to Wednesday, we'll start moving down to the more complicated parts of the flowchart. But today it's pretty straightforward. Number 4 says, after a hard-fought tennis match, competitors Anthony and Becky must decide whether to do a handshake, a fist bump, or a high five. Use the given payoff matrix to determine each person's optimum strategy and the value of the game. You ever do that? Where you try to high five somebody and they went to fist bump and then you switch and then it's kind of embarrassing and awkward. Maybe you're going to handshake and they're going to fist bump. It's kind of awkward when it's not right, okay? So this payoff matrix is not really talking about money. It's talking about, like, I guess, embarrassment points or something. So a negative number would be really embarrassing for the role player. Then the role player wants positive numbers. That makes them feel good. And a negative number is bad. Okay, so it's the same concept, but we're just not dealing with money. We're talking about embarrassment or shame or something like that. But we're trying to find a saddle point. So remember how we find a saddle point. Underline the smallest number in the row. Remember, that's like what's the worst that can happen. What's the worst that can happen? What's the worst that can happen? What's the worst that can happen? Those are the worst things that could happen for the role player. Now we're going to circle the biggest number in the column because that's the worst thing that could happen for the column player. Worst that could happen right here. Remember that 2 means that Becky loses 2. And that 6 means Becky loses 6. And that 7 means Becky loses 7. Okay? So is there a saddle point? Yeah, there is. This right here is a saddle point. And that tells me everything that's going to happen in this game. Okay? The value of the game is 2. Okay? The value of the game is 2. And I know that Anthony is going to do a fist bump. And I know that Becky is going to do what? Handshake. Okay. So, if we were talking about money, Anthony wins 2 and Becky loses 2. That's the value of the game. Is this a fair game? Do you remember the definition for fair game? Yeah. Fair game has a value of 0. This is not a fair game. Number 5, consider each payoff matrix. If a saddle point exists, find the saddle point, the strategy producing it, the value of the game, and determine whether it's fair. So same thing. You think about what's the worst that can happen. Well, either way, it's 2 or 0, 1, or 3. That's the worst that could happen for any one of the 4 rows that the role player might play. Then we look at the 2 columns. The worst thing that could happen for the column player is lose 3 or lose 7. Okay? So we can see the saddle point. Is 3. I can see that the role player plays row 4. Notice if there's no context given, you just say it's whatever row it is. Okay? Row 4. And the column player plays column 1. The value of the game is 3. That's just the saddle point number. Okay? So is this fair? Not fair. Okay? Forget about your emotions and what you've always thought of as fair. we have a definition for fair, and a fair game has a value of 0. This is not fair. So then let's look at the other one. Look back at the row player. The worst that can happen for row 1 is a 4. The worst that can happen for row 2 is lose 9. For the column player likes negatives, so the worst that could happen is this 4, or this 6, or this 4, or this 12. Okay? So it's weird to think about. We can see the value of the game. The value is definitely going to be 4, which is not fair. As for the saddle point, I think that's arguable. There's 2 different number 4s. So I'm still going to go ahead and call this a saddle point of 4. Okay. The row player is definitely going to play row 1. The column player, it's a little bit more complicated. Okay. You might say, well, the column player could play either column 1 or column 3, and that's true, but I think he'd be more likely to play one than the other. Why would the column player probably play column 1? Right. If the row player screws up and doesn't play his best strategy, the column player is going to prefer that -8 over that +3 there. So the column player is probably going to play column 1, I think. Okay.